Morning, everyone. My name is Jose Sousa. I'm with the DC Public Housing Authority, and welcome to our RAD overview of DCHA properties. Thank you for joining us for this session. It's being recorded on WebEx, and we are posting this to our www.dcha.us website. Today, I wanted to quickly go over our agenda with all of you. Where we'll be discussing why RAD and some RAD facts, RAD being, of course, a rental assistance demonstration project, some of the planned RAD transactions of DCHA properties, as well as an overview of our resident engagement, especially in light of some COVID-19 considerations taking place right now this summer during our pandemic. And we'll close with some next steps after this process. I'll now kick it over to my colleague.
Thank you very much, Jose. This is Alex Morris. I'm the Chief of Planning, Design, and Construction for the DC Housing Authority. I'll be taking you through most of the rest of the presentation. The first question on our agenda is, why do we apply for HUD's RAD program? The answer is twofold. Number one, HUD does not currently provide enough funding to make the improvements that we need to make at our public housing sites. And RAD, or what's called the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, is an option to obtain more sustainable funding sources for public housing authorities and provide improvements to the public housing properties by converting from Section 9 public housing to Section 8 vouchers. DCHA currently estimates its capital needs in its public housing portfolio at something around $2.5 billion. RAD is a HUD program that allows DCHA to fund major building improvements and stabilize federal funding for the future with no resident displacement, no loss of housing benefits, and no change in the rent calculation of 30% of adjusted gross income. Now some facts about RAD. RAD stands for the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program. HUD crafted this federal program as a response to fill the growing gap between decreasing federal funding for public housing and the increasing capital needs of public housing. Because federal funding is often not enough to provide for the high upkeep costs of existing properties, RAD allows a public housing authority to move away from the federal annual contributions contract towards Section 8, or what's called Housing Choice Voucher Program assistance. This makes it possible to obtain funding from private or alternative sources to improve the capital needs of buildings. So what will DCHA do with RAD? One of the things we're going to do is make improvements to the buildings that are being converted from public housing to RAD. The scope of work of these improvements can and will include things like apartment renovations, new kitchens, bathrooms, and finishes, updated systems like electrical, plumbing, fire, and mechanical systems. That includes heating and air conditioning, making energy efficiency improvements, installing new windows, roofs, and building exterior improvements, enhanced community spaces, and improved building security. And some of these improvements are in the works already using DC Council funds, but we will be looking in the future for resident feedback for any future building improvements we make at buildings we convert through RAD. The other thing about RAD that's nice is that RAD is used typically for rehab as opposed to redevelopment. And so when you convert from public housing to RAD, you'll have the same number of apartments that the building had before, the same configuration of units, the same bedroom mix, and phased construction to minimize moves. And so what we're doing, just to explain that, is as opposed to doing outside relocation outside of the property to another property and then bring people back, we're looking at phased construction. So people will stay in the building and move to a currently vacant unit that we make ready and then move back to their unit. So the next question to address is, what are my rights as a resident? Under RAD, you have the guaranteed right to return with no rescreening, full relocation assistance if you need to move temporarily during construction. And this full relocation assistance includes assistance with moving expenses, packing, and also utility connections, any changes to utilities, change of address, anything like that, we provide that assistance. The resident-based rent is based on 30% of adjusted income, and resident councils will still be funded in the same manner as they're funded under public housing. So how does RAD work? RAD allows the Public Housing Authority to work with partners who want to invest in building improvements. This can give DCHA the opportunity to borrow money for improvements, seek bond issuance for the improvements, work with philanthropic partners to raise money, or take on a development partner to help development of a project.
Thank you, Alex. This is Jose again. Just wanted to quickly go over some of the resident engagement protocols that are in place via HUD on RAD. Prior to submission to HUD, we are required to conduct these meetings, and so DCHA has provided the residents of some properties with a resident information notice already. The resident information notice, often referred to as the RIN, conveys general written information on potential project plans and resident rights under RAD to those residents. DCHA conducts at least 2 resident meetings prior to any application, and additional meetings may well be necessary if plans change or if the Public Housing Authority will require extensions from HUD on their RAD efforts. One thing that will also be required is that we will need to secure board approval from our Board of Commissioners prior to submitting the RAD application to HUD. We will submit to HUD a written summary of all the resident comments and questions, as well as our responses to those comments received. In order to make sure that we are complying with all levels of access to these meetings, we'll ensure effective communication with persons with disabilities and anyone experiencing any language barriers. This means making meetings accessible to various types of any ADA challenges that could limit our communication, but also allowing us to comply with DC language access laws. One of the things that I also wanted to bring everyone's attention to is during this pandemic, we are relying on HUD guidance on how we can still provide a meaningful engagement in a COVID-19 environment. HUD has issued waivers on this issue that basically indicate that mandatory public meetings must still take place despite COVID-19. However, if a public housing authority like ours is in the effect of an emergency order or other law that prohibits large gatherings or has size limits, the meetings can be held remotely and in a virtual manner. And that's what we'll be doing over the course of the next couple of months at several of our properties. A lot of these meetings are going to be held on WebEx. They're going to be held remotely. And we at DCHA will have a method in place to accept questions and answers, both in the chat function of those meetings, but also through those of you who will be calling in to participate in these meetings. We'll maintain an attendance log to make sure that we are keeping track of who is taking part in the meetings. And the format will also allow for anyone with limited English proficiency needs to be able to get the services they require in order to fully participate in the discussion. In addition to that, we're providing residents with a follow-up notice after the meeting with a summary of the presented information that we discussed and additional means to ask questions that you may not have been asked at the meeting. One additional feature we're taking into consideration this year and is underway at several of the properties is both pre and post meeting calls. We have shared the RIN at one particular property, and so we are calling all residents to confirm that they've received the RIN, to help answer any questions that they have regarding what they've received, to ensure that they're aware of the meeting, and we'll be doing an additional call after the meeting to discuss any questions that may not have been asked at that first meeting. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you, Jose. Currently, DCHA is pursuing RAD projects in the following locations. Project that we're calling Melvo, which is the Montana Terrace, Elvins Road, Lincoln Road, Villager, and Ontario Road properties. This project already has received approval from HUD and is moving toward a closing, with improvements to the buildings is scheduled to start in the next calendar year in 2021. In addition to Melvo, we are also pursuing RAD projects at Judiciary House, Kelly Miller, and LaDroit. And Kelly Miller is a partial application only for the townhouses at Kelly Miller. Potomac Gardens, also a partial application for the high-rise towers on 12th. Langston Dwellings, Benning Terrace, which is also a partial application, and Stoddard Terrace, which is a partial application.
Thank you, Alex. We wanted to give you a quick overview of some of the next steps that you can anticipate over the course of the next several weeks and months as we go through this process. Buildings that are in our targeted RAD portfolio will be receiving their RIN notice, their resident information notice. There's a lot of information here. It's important that you read it, that you ask questions, and that if you require any assistance with those questions, that you reach out to us. Additionally, residents will receive a phone call from our team. That phone call will mainly be to discuss whether you've received the materials in question and to help answer some of the preliminary questions that you have on what the RAD process entails. The mailings that we're sending out also include a robust set of fact sheets provided by HUD on the entire RAD process. We'd love to hear from you, and so we ask that if you have additional questions, that you email us at transformationplan@dchousing.org to receive, to ask any questions that you have, but also to be able to receive a digital meeting invite for the forthcoming RAD meetings that will be taking place at the properties. Additionally, we've set up a phone line. You may call 202-996-8526 with any questions you have about the RAD process or any other transformation plan inquiries you have of DCHA. We're really looking forward to working with everyone on this process, on this important initiative, and we thank you for your time. You'll be hearing from us soon about forthcoming meetings. And again, please reach out to us if you have any additional questions. Alex, do you have anything with us as we close this portion of the recording?
No, I think we've covered everything. Thank you.
Thank you.